My presentation is going to cover a lot of the same ground that Amanda's covered, talking about the stimulus and some of the latest happenings up at the Capitol. I did want to start, though, with just a quick recap of some of the changes on the on-campus requirements. I know, Connie, we had some emails going back and forth about what sort of were some districts' options there. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of an update on something that came down from TEA that I don't think any of the previous presenters discussed, and apologies if they did. But on the last, I think, commissioner call, Commissioner Morath announced that districts do have the option, in the guidance, they lay out those, 5 options for limiting on-campus access. And they've added an additional one related to when the assessments are being administered. So if there's a student that's not scheduled to take an assessment on that day, the district can require them to learn remotely on a scheduled testing day. And that option applies to K through 8th grade. And per agency guidance, that should be limited to a maximum of 5 days per testing administration. And to do that, you have to submit a waiver request to TEA, and on the PDF version of this document that's posted on the Region 1 website, you can click on that. That'll take you right to it. And then this will take you to a Q&A for more information on that. And then sort of just to kind of go back to that email chain that I think was going around with districts there at Region 1. So the context of this was what are the potential consequences for not complying with this or limiting on-campus attendance for a different reason that wasn't included in TEA's guidance. And so I just wanted to point y'all to that one part of TEA's attendance and enrollment FAQ document where they sort of address this. And they say that for days in which the schools are out of compliance with the on-campus requirements, schools will only be able to claim half of the eligible operational minutes towards the 75,600. And so I think there were a couple of districts that had adopted a calendar that was in excess of the 75,600. So they viewed, they kind of had some wiggle room to potentially take the hit on those non-compliance days and still be above the 75,600. And so they wouldn't have been reduced, they wouldn't see reduced funding due to their not meeting that requirement. I did want to point out that in the guidance, TEA does note that depending on the nature of the non-compliance, additional corrective actions may be taken. And so that's about all I know about those potential additional consequences. But I just wanted to point that out that TEA has included that language in the guidance there. So if that's something you are considering, I know a number of Region 1 districts are. Please reach out to our friends at TEA and make sure you are you're really solid on what the potential consequences could be and how that would impact potentially your district's funding. Moving on to the stimulus, and I'll kind of go through this quickly since Amanda already touched on a lot of it. Again, it's about, as she noted, it's about 4 times larger than the CARES Act. It's structured similarly. It even has the same fun name. If you guys were all tired of seeing that ESSER acronym, we're gonna have to live with it for a little bit longer. But this new stimulus, which I think's been dubbed Carissa, and so I'm gonna go with that convention. But it flows funds again through ESSER. Similarly, it's based on Title I Part A counts, and 90% of it can go to is required to go to LEAs per those Title I counts. And also, as Amanda pointed out, it includes similar maintenance of effort requirements. And then I make that same point in that last bullet point that because of House Bill 3, it's and that sort of infusion of state funding that bill represented, that sort of helps, or it makes it likely that these ESSER 2 funds could be used to supplant state funds because, with House Bill 3, they're already, the state's coming in above that fiscal 17 to 19, that 3-year average. And so it's likely that the state will supplant state funds with that, or at least it's likely that they have the option to. Some things that aren't in CRRSA or with these new ESSER 2 funds, there's no private nonprofit equitable service requirement. I know I got a couple questions from Region 1 districts on that. I think that was kind of a headache for some of y'all. The way, just a little bit of context here, private schools receive money through a separate pot of funding with this new stimulus package. It's through the fund that goes to governors across the country. And so I think that should be a little bit of welcome news there. So some things that advocacy, school advocacy groups at the national level were sort of asking for that didn't make it into this bill was funding specifically aimed at improving students' access, both at home. They call it the homework gap. That's sort of the buzzword for that. And what that's just referring to is internet access, access to devices at home. And so that's a specific pot of money aimed at that was not included in this round. And then there was a lot of conversation about liability protections. I think both for businesses and for school districts, and whether or not that would be included in this round of stimulus. And that was not included, as I note there, in the CRRSA bill. And so that's about all I have on the federal stimulus package. I'll move on to sort of the latest happenings at the legislature. I'll start with just some notable bills, and we touched on some of these, I think, at the last FAC meeting, but I'll just kind of go through them real quickly. We have a number of bills that would make some tweaks to the funding formulas. One in particular listed there, House Bill 163, would give the highest comp ed weight to students experiencing homelessness. And I think, and actually maybe if Amanda's still on, I think that the Comp Ed Advisory Committee that I believe she sits on has made some recommendations in that area. And so there may be some news there that she might be willing to offer.
Hey, Josh, yeah, it's my understanding that they are funding homeless based on that highest tier. And so I think that's sort of would just conform law to practice.
Yeah, great. And so then then there's some other bills that with House Bill 332, I believe from Representative Tallarico, that would change the allowable use of comp ed funding to include socio-emotional learning programs. And then House Bill 220 would, the goal of that bill is to essentially drive more dollars to struggling campuses and essentially give them funding equal to what the campus would have generated if they had an 1882 agreement. And for those that aren't familiar with that, that's under the funding formulas, you can get additional money if you if you enter into a partnership with a charter operator, you can get sort of additional state funds that way. So this would allow those campuses to draw down those additional dollars without having to have a charter partnership. House Bill 617 would create a new allotment for students whose parents or legal guardians have been incarcerated. And then there's been a lot of discussion on sort of the CTE fix, particularly for small and mid-sized schools. What used to be House Bill 523, it was now Senator Springer's bill. I don't know if he's refiled that bill. So if you go look up House Bill 523, that's why the asterisk is there. It's a different bill. It's been reassigned. And so I would expect that to be a Senate bill at some point. He's just now, won his election. And so I'd imagine he'd be refiling a lot of those same bills as well. But what that would do is it would add the small and mid-sized district adjustment to the CTE allotment. And then House Bill 334 would increase that CTE allotment from the spending requirement from 55% to 90%. I think that's, again, I think we touched on this last time. The impulse there, I think, is to drive more dollars to CTE programs. I think maybe some communication needs to be done on sort of what impact that would have on your flexibility as a district in terms of how you guys allocate your funds. And so I think the motivation there was probably a good one, but I think just communicating the reality of what that requirement means to schools is going to be important moving forward. And then a couple of bills related to sort of virtual learning, or how the ADA basis of the school funding system. We've seen a couple of bills come through. House Bill 538 would remove some restrictions that prohibit districts from becoming a full-time online school provider through the Texas Virtual School Network. House Bill 1017 would study the impact of changing from an ADA-based funding system to one based on average daily membership. I think a number of states base their system on average daily membership. I believe New Mexico does, if I'm not mistaken. And so this would kind of study what the impact would be if Texas makes a similar shift. And then House Bill 258 would create a new allotment for students learning remotely. I don't believe there's been a weight or a dollar amount included in that bill, but I think that's one to watch from Senator Menendez, I believe, in the San Antonio area. As Amanda mentioned, there's a number of bills that are looking at property taxes. Some of these are just to abolish the school property taxes. So I didn't include all of those. Those are sort of filed pretty regularly. These are just a handful of ones that I thought were notable. House Bill 35 would require a bond or tax rate increase to be approved by at least 25% of registered voters. I think that's an idea that's kind of been kicking around for a while. And so that's come back now. House Bill 183 would essentially create an additional school tax ceiling, and it would depend not on the age of the resident, but on how long they've lived in the home and how much the taxes have grown over that time. So that could have some real impacts on property tax revenues. House Bill 778 would, and there's companion bills over in the Senate side that would give a 10-year extension to the Chapter 313 program, which if y'all aren't familiar with that, I know we work with a number of Region 1 districts that do have those agreements, but for those that aren't, it allows school districts to enter into property value limitation agreements with certain eligible projects that come into the state. I'll switch gears here a little bit to the biennial revenue estimate. As Amanda pointed out, this most recent estimate that was released just before session kicked off sort of revised the beginning balance. Sort of the main headline from this projection was that the shortfall was revised down back in July. The controller estimated that we would end the 2021 biennium with around a negative $4.6 billion shortfall. You can see here now in 22-23, the beginning balance now down to negative, just under $1 billion shortfall. And so that's really welcome news. Controller Hager cited better than expected online sales tax collections and lower than originally forecasted state expenditures for that downward revision. And so again, that's welcome news, and I think it puts the state budget writers in a little bit better of a position than we had thought they would be in this past summer. A couple other things to mention there. That estimate did not include the impact of the 5% cuts that were requested by state leadership. The controller has estimated that could be around $1 billion, and so that would essentially take care of that $1 billion shortfall there. And the controller also mentioned that his shortfall estimate did not reflect the full impact of federal stimulus dollars, and so that could be some help there once that's sort of fully reflected in the 2021 numbers. A couple other things I just want to note real quick about this this estimate, particularly for 22-23. You can see there that Controller Hager is estimating $112.53 billion available for general purpose spending. That's based on the economy performing in a particular way, and sort of the benchmarks he set out in the BRE was looking at real gross state product over the next biennium. He's forecasting around 4% annual growth in real gross state product. In fiscal 2020, we saw that number, it's expected to come in around -1%. And so to kind of get us to that 112.53, we're going to need sort of a return to moderate growth. And so to the extent that that doesn't materialize, those revenues that he's forecasting may not come in at the level that he's projected. He's also projected oil prices at around $50 to $55 per barrel over the next biennium. The average price for 2020, according to the controller, was around $45. And as many of y'all know, the oil prices dipped into negative territory on the spot market back in April. And so that's just a very volatile, it's always been a very volatile area of the state budget. And so, to the extent that we don't hit those marks that he's sort of banking on in his estimate, those revenues, we may not hit that those revenue projections. And as Amanda mentioned, we did yesterday get the sort of initial budget proposals from the House and Senate. They are very similar. I have listed there $119.7 billion. And if you think back to what was just on the previous slide, you'll notice that is higher than what the controller estimated in terms of revenues available to spend. And I'll touch on that more here in a minute. Like I mentioned, the two bills are very similar, particularly in the public education portions of the bills. A couple just sort of high level notes there. The 5% cuts requested back in May for the 2021 biennium they were not restored with this latest proposal. And just in terms of comparison, this budget compared to the current biennium that we're in now, the 2021 biennium, it represents around a 4% increase, but when you factor in population and inflation growth, it's actually a 3% decline from what we are sort of currently spending in this biennium. Neither the House or Senate tapped the rainy day fund, and so I think I had it on the previous slide, but if not, that the controller was forecasting that at growing to up to $11.6 billion by the end of next biennium. And so both of those proposals, again, just kind of let funds flow into the rainy day fund and don't utilize that to address any of the shortfall. So like I mentioned, this the budget proposals that we've seen from the House and Senate do exceed what the controller has said he thinks will be available for general revenue spending over the next biennium by a little bit more than $7 billion. And I'll touch on sort of what option, and Amanda kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but what options lawmakers have to address that here in a little bit. But first I wanted to go through what's in there specifically regarding public education. Both budgets fully fund House Bill 3. There's no reductions to formula funding. Both budgets include, and again, Amanda touched on this, the projected enrollment growth. They are projecting enrollment growth a little bit lower than sort of the usual levels of enrollment growth that we see. And I think, we kind of all are aware of the reasons for that. Both budgets include around $1 billion to fund property tax compression for the next biennium. And that's based on, in part, the controller's new forecast for statewide property value growth. He's projecting pretty modest growth over the next couple years. And both budgets include money needed to transition to the online STAR test. And so that initiative, I think, is still a priority with TEA, and it's still on track. So some of the tools that lawmakers have to address that about $7 billion shortfall for this upcoming biennium. Like I mentioned, they have the rainy day fund, which the controller has forecasted could grow to $11.6 billion by the end of that biennium. And I think Amanda almost touched on all of these options. They could delay the August payment, which is something they've done in the past. That could free up about $2 billion this biennium. The new stimulus funding that we touched on earlier, to the extent that they use that to supplant state dollars, that could free up around $5.5 billion. So they have tools to, they have a lot of tools in the toolbox to address that shortfall. And so, one question we've gotten is, is this 2011 all over again? Should we expect cuts? Are we in that same position? I think the short answer is no. We had around, in the current biennium back in 2011, we had around a $4 billion shortfall, and then to continue the same services in the next biennium is around $27 billion shortfall. And so you can just kind of tell that we're not in the same kind of ballpark as where we were back then. And as Leo and Amanda have both noted, state leadership and both the governor and appropriation chairs have all sort of laid down a marker indicating that they're committed to maintaining House Bill 3, and that passed unanimously, and there's a lot of support for that about the Capitol. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit to talk about just other activity besides the budget that's been going on at session. I think I just have a couple more slides left, so I'll move quickly through this. The Senate adopted its rules. One thing to note there is it lowered the threshold required to bring legislation to the floor from 19 votes to 18 votes. This change, what this really means is now the Senate's 18 Republicans can bring bills to the floor without securing support from Democrats. And so last session, that threshold was at 19 votes because there were 19 Republicans. And so now with that change of that one seat, they revised that downward. Over in the House, they also adopted their rules and they elected a new speaker, Representative Dade Phelan. I think we touched on this last time we got together, and he replaces the outgoing speaker, Dennis Bonin. Regarding their rules and how they're going to do their business this next session, sort of two notable decisions that were made is that there was an effort to, from some of the more far-right elements of the Republican Party, to have only Republican committee chairs this session. That was voted down pretty handily, and the House decided to maintain its tradition of having bipartisan committee chairs. So I think that bodes well for just the the likelihood of getting things done and working together this next session. And they did not take up a proposal to create what was called a consensus calendar. And what that would have done is just create a sort of a fast track for bills that were deemed non-controversial. And I'm sorry, one second. Sorry for that. And there were some concerns about that may be a vehicle to move bills and legislation in a way that didn't allow the public and school district advocates to really review or to weigh in on. And so that ended up not making it into the final rules that were adopted. In terms of COVID-19 protocols, I know we're getting some questions on just how do I talk to my legislator? I can't go to Austin, or at least in person, it's not as accessible as it was in previous sessions. How are they doing their business? How can I communicate best to my representatives? And so it varies. The House and the Senate adopted a little bit different rules there. Over on the House, they decided to not require testing for members to access the House floor. Members will have to wear masks except when they're at the front and back microphones. They did decide to allow virtual testimony, but likely be by invitation only. In terms of how to communicate with the members or do office visits or that kind of thing, the members themselves were given discretion on how they want to run their individual offices. For most offices, they prefer calls, Zooms, emails, or that's sort of the preferred communication method. And so I just, anecdotally, it seemed like a lot of them are waiting until they're a lot of the staff are saying, until my boss is, vaccinated, we're just going to do everything virtual. And so that seems to be kind of where at least a lot of the offices are coming down. Over on the Senate side, they did require testing or showing proof that you have been vaccinated. Members either of those to enter the Senate chamber or committee rooms. And senators are required to wear a face mask on the floor. And then again, similarly as over in the House, they were given discretion on how they wanted to run their individual offices. They wanted to allow in-person visits, or if they just wanted to be essentially fully remote. So it's going to vary depending on your representatives, and but at least at this stage, given just where all the numbers are and sort of the early days of vaccine distribution, I say almost all of them are operating remotely at this point. I think wrapping up here, I'll talk a little bit about committee assignments. So the House has not released their assignments. Today is the due date for representatives to submit their preferences on what committees they want to sit on. Over on the Senate, that was announced late last week. A couple changes just in in the committee, the committees themselves. The Property Tax Committee was replaced by the Local Government Committee. It's still chaired by Senator Paul Betancourt. And the vice chair for that is Senator Jose Menendez from San Antonio. The Ag Committee was merged with Water and Rural Affairs. So now it's the Water and Ag and Rural Affairs Committee. The Intergovernmental Affairs Committee was disbanded, and the Education Committee did see some changes to its membership. We still have Senator Larry Taylor as the chair, but Senator Donna Campbell, Senator Zaffarini, and formerly Senator Fallon, now U.S. Representative Fallon, are out. And to take their place are Senator Jose Menendez from San Antonio, Senator Charles Perry from Lubbock, and Senator Schwertner from Georgetown. Just a little, quick little, I guess, background on some of these guys. Senator Menendez, he's filed, I've talked a little bit about some of the bills he's filed. He's very, I think, viewed as a leader, definitely in the mental health area. He's filed a number of bills in that area. He filed the bill I mentioned earlier about getting additional funding for virtual instruction. He's filed a number of bills, to help boost TRS and teacher pay. So that's kind of those are kind of his priorities. Senator Perry, I don't believe has been too terribly involved in filing education bills in the past. I think recently he's made rural internet connectivity a major issue, and so that's definitely a priority for him. With Senator Schwertner, he's in the past been supportive of voucher legislation, and while he ultimately did support House Bill 3, I think after a conference committee, he was one of there's either 2 or 3 votes, I think, in the Senate that were initially against it. And I think his concerns were around the fiscal note and just sort of the completion, or he didn't think the fiscal note that was included when it made its way out of the Senate was detailed enough, but ultimately he did vote for House Bill 3.